Hello, everybody. I think I'm live. Yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Wrestlenomics Radio, or whatever I'm going to call this. I'm putting this out on YouTube right now. It's actually streaming live, and I'm going to put the audio on the Patreon for patrons too, just for convenience. So I'm Brandon Thurston. We're going to talk about today. Well, today is September 6th, 2021. It's a Monday. Yesterday was Sunday, September 5th, 2021. And All Out happened for All Elite Wrestling, as everyone knows. And we're going to talk about some of the business. We're talking about the reception and some of the business notes that we know or that we can speculate on at this point related to All Out. We'll talk about maybe some lessons in history that this reminds us of, and finally, sort of a sanity check about the industry in general and about WWE and AEW overall. So, first we'll talk about pay-per-view. We don't know what the pay-per-view sales were, what the buys were. There's no such thing as a buy rate, only the buys. The record going into this, I believe, is 135,000 buys for Revolution in March. That featured the barbed wire exploding death match between Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley. 135,000 is the peak. And this breaks the record. Basically, certainly, according to Tony Khan here. He says on Twitter that he thanks everybody who ordered the pay-per-view. It was, where does he say this? The most watched AEW pay-per-view ever, in his words. I've been told that a good over-under is about 200,000. We'll see how it shakes out. Whether we get any details about that with any kind of certainty anytime soon, I don't know. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000. Whether it's over or under will largely depend on what the sales were for traditional pay-per-view. I was told there was strong growth on digital pay-per-view, including in the U.S., where the pay-per-view was available on Fight. I think this is the first time that a pay-per-view for AEW was available on Fight for AEW. And it was also available on Bleacher Report. Previous to this, it had been exclusively in the U.S. available on Bleacher Report Live, BR Live. That app has been sunsetted in favor of Bleacher Report, but that wasn't available on all of the devices. But Fight TV was added, I guess, to just cover a greater number of devices. About 50-50 of the sales digitally were on Fight and on Bleacher Report. So strong growth digitally. We don't know what the sales were for traditional pay-per-view, but somewhere around 200,000. Could be a lot more, could be somewhat less, and it might be a while before anybody's able to report, I think, with some more certainty what the pay-per-view sales were. But basically, certainly breaking the record of 135,000 set by Revolution earlier this year. 115,000, certainly shattering that, well ahead of that. We can talk about the ticket sales for this event, too. A sellout. WrestleTix counts tickets distributed of 10,164. No idea what a gate would be for this, but we can take an estimate here. Of course, the pay-per-view sold so fast that WrestleTix wasn't able to get a great look at the ticket prices. But if we say, let's say $60 average ticket price, let's take a guess. And let's say, actually, before we go to that, let's say there's 10,164 tickets. Let's say 90% of them are paid. Let's say there's a $60, let's try that again, times 0.19, okay, times a $60 average ticket price. We end up with over a $500,000 gate. My gut would guess that maybe that's on the low side, because I believe the Arthur Ashe Stadium shows, which has a much higher attendance, right? About 17,000 rather than 10,000. But I think that show is going to get close to 1 million. So I would guess a little bit more than this number that is on the screen right now, over 500,000. The number that's on the screen here is 548,000. So there's that. And of course, we had the debut of Bryan Danielson, of Adam Cole, and the first match in 7 years from CM Punk. It reminds us of some other moments in history. As I said on Twitter, history doesn't repeat itself, or as Mark Twain said, I think, really. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. It reminds me of the year 2000, where in the summer of 2000, Mitsuharu Misawa led most of the Japanese wrestlers from All Japan Pro Wrestling to leave All Japan Pro Wrestling and form Noah, unhappy with how things were going with Motoko Baba, who, of course, was taking over the business, or was already involved with the business, but was more in control of the business after the passing of Giant Baba. Reminds others, too, of maybe this is a significant moment in history comparable to the formation of the NWO in July 1996 that led to a really strong period of business for WCW. It reminds me, too, a little bit of the Radicals all moving over from WCW to the WF in, I think this would be, January 1999, the night after Chris Benoit wins the title in a tournament against Sid on WCW pay-per-view. So, someone asked me too earlier today, before we get to that, I guess I want to talk about the flow of talent that the Radicals move reminds me of. That the flow of talent, obviously WWF had been, if we look to the Raw and Nitro, by this time the WWF had really started to take a lead here in early '99, and really took off even more strongly after that point. To the middle of '99 is kind of when it peaks, and they have a nice sustained peak here through to the middle of 2000. And I think the flow of talent tells you something about what's happening in wrestling business. The flow of talent from the WF to WCW forecasted a strong period of business for WCW. The flow of talent from WCW to the WF, including those 4 members of the Radicals who were, if you don't know, Saturn, Perry Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko. Chris Jericho moving over. This was 2000, wasn't it? Anyway, I think this was early 2000. It was sold out 2000. Now it's all coming back to me. I ordered that pay-per-view. Had my dad order it on pay-per-view probably through DirecTV. I think this is early 2000. Yeah, it has to be. So where does that line up? That lines up with WF already being well ahead, and WCW just continued to decline. It was already on a decline, but continued to decline from there. But anyway, you had the flow of Jericho in the summer, I believe, of '99 coming from WCW to WF. And now we have a flow of talent. We're probably done with some of the biggest names in terms of Bryan Danielson and CM Punk, but we're seeing the flow of talent from WWE to AEW. Forecasting, not necessarily AEW taking over WWE's market share, but forecasting maybe a continued strong period of business for AEW. And I don't know, we'll talk more generally about WWE and the business in general in a moment. But and someone was bringing up to me, was it gradual? How gradual was WCW becoming more popular or doing better in business than WF? And we can see from the beginning of the Monday Night Wars, if you have a line chart here on the screen, it was very competitive between Raw and Nitro for the first year or so before, really, in the summer of 1996, which coincides with the time when the NWO was formed and Hulk Hogan turned heel, and that's the period, that starts the period when WCW Nitro consistently beat Raw in ratings, which ends around, where does this line up? Somewhere in the summer or spring of 1998, coinciding roughly with the timing of WrestleMania 1998 with Mike Tyson and Steve Austin winning the title and becoming really the main figure in WWF at the time. So there's that. And if we look to the pay-per-view buys, the trends of the pay-per-view buys for WCW, so around the time that Eric Bischoff took over in, I think, early 1993, right, is when Bill Watts is out, around Super Brawl 1993. And there's a few years of WCW doing similar business on pay-per-view in terms of buys. I'm not sure if the price point changed here. But, and then around late 1996, it really grows, and we have some really high points here in 1998, especially in 1997. At the very end, you have the Starrcade 1997 pay-per-view, including the Sting and Hogan match. So it takes a few years, maybe, for things to really take off. There's WCW pay-per-views again. If we can look too at when was the last time a non-WWE pay-per-view drew 200,000 buys, which might be in the neighborhood of where this pay-per-view All Out 2021 ends up. And if we look at the very end of WCW, all of these pay-per-views, these last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the last 8 pay-per-views are all under 100,000. All under 100,000. We have, what is this? I think this is Bash at the Beach 2000 with like the Hogan and Vince Russo shoot, does 100,000. And then we have a couple more that do under 100,000. And then we have what looks to be Spring Stampede 2000 doing 115,000. So there's quite a few WCW pay-per-views that not only are under 200,000, but that are under 100,000. And if we scroll quickly back to the AEW column graph, you can see that we've got 3 pay-per-views over 100,000. That is Double or Nothing 2020, in front of no fans, by the way, or at least not in front of a normal live audience. This is into the pandemic era. And then Revolution 2021, where I've got someone trying to interrupt the very important Wrestlenomics briefing that's happening right now. Then we got Revolution 2021, which is the high point, 135,000 pay-per-view buys, and 115,000 for Double or Nothing. All of these other pay-per-views just under 100,000. This pay-per-view may be doing as much as 200,000, maybe more. So if we go back and we look at what the last exclusive pay-per-views for WWE did, I went into these WWE published in their KPIs, in their key performance indicators, line charts with no numeric labels on them, but line charts that seem to be created based on real data, based on real numbers. And I put them into a web app that calculates based on the y-axis and x-axis, and the y-axis with the number of buys in thousands is labeled. And I was able to deduce from that numbers that are similar to what's on Wrestlenomics.com right now already. Some of these are a little lower, but you get an idea of what the pay-per-views were at the very end of the exclusive pay-per-view era for WWE. That is, you might want to call it the pre-network era, where Elimination Chamber, the last exclusive pay-per-view for WWE, did 185,000 buys. And a number of pay-per-views doing under 200,000. And in fact, we can look at the Punk pay-per-view, the famous CM Punk pay-per-view, Money in the Bank 2011, did 218,000 buys. So it did just over 200,000 buys. And we can just call out a few pay-per-views that did under 200,000. Nothing does under 100,000. What's the lowest that we can find on here? 170, 175, is that the lowest? 165,000 for Capital Punishment 2011. I'm just looking at 2011 and forward. But yeah, 164,000 for Capital Punishment, 178,000 for Survivor Series 2013. That is not the Rock one. The Rock one, I think, is right here. 2011 Survivor Series did 283. But anyway, suffice to say, if All Out 2021 ends up doing, when all the numbers are recorded, 200,000 buys, it would be doing more buys than several of the WWE pay-per-views in the last couple of years before the network was launched and WWE disrupted its own pay-per-view business. So there's that. Now, if we could have a sanity check here about what's the state of pro wrestling, and what's the state of, excuse me, if you're just in the media business or the sports entertainment business or whatever business you want to say that you're in, what's the state of WB and of AEW and the industry in general? First, I would say that I've seen some people, especially sort of mainstream sports media type people, suggest that well maybe now competition will be really great for the industry. In some ways, yeah, it will be, or that finally Vince is going to have a fire lit under him, and they're going to make adjustments, and they've got to be watching this and seeing what's going on, and they're going to be motivated to do things differently. And I think that just underestimates and doesn't take into account for all of the times in history, in recent history, that we've seen WWE in various ways sort of promise to reinvent itself, or as maybe Vince would say, reimagine WWE creative. And it's been a short term, it's sort of, I think as Wade Keller has said, put a Band-Aid on cancer. I don't see WWE being able to revamp its creative or to do anything that recalibrates its creative in any real and meaningful way. The last 20 years of watching Vince McMahon conduct the creative for his on-screen programming, I think would inform you that he's going to do things the way that he wants to do them. And if anything, they seem to be doubling down on Vince's vision of talent and of creative as well. Not looking to readjust or to respond to AEW. And economically, there's no incentive for WWE to do things differently than they're doing it currently. WWE is more profitable than ever. WWE is generating more revenue than ever. Their US TV deals, which are a massive source of their revenue, are guaranteed to escalate over time through almost the end of 2023, regardless of what their ratings are, regardless of what their television viewership is. And they've just signed a new deal with Peacock that is probably escalating over time as well in terms of the payments that they get from NBC Universal to WB. So the economic incentives to change are not really there, even though I'm sure they're monitoring all sorts of trends and metrics. Ultimately, I think Vince is going to do what he wants to do, and that's largely produce a product that is more to his taste, which he believes is also the widest possible market's taste. So I don't see things changing as long as Vince is in creative, and he seems to be in good health. So I've been asked too whether WWE is a good stock, whether it's valued properly or whether it's undervalued. And I've got a chart here on the screen here just showing of the last 5 years the trends of WWE's share price, and there's a yellow line showing how much the price, even as it's settled down in recent times, has overperformed the S&P 500 over a 5-year period. Over a 5-year period, the stock price is up 158%, and the S&P 500 is up 113%. And in fact, if you sold the stock at one of its peaks in the middle of 2018 or early 2019, you would have made out really well. You'd have made something like a 300%, almost 400% return on your investment. But I think as much as you can criticize, I think rightly so, the execution of WWE's creative and the money that's leaving on the table for WWE, despite its financial success, I think there's a lesson of late in watching the TV ratings trends that have exceeded my expectations since the return to touring. It conflicts with the notion that we see among a lot of disenfranchised fans who are really embracing AEW right now. The TV ratings for WWE, Raw, and SmackDown, not so much NXT, but for Raw and SmackDown have sustained and have improved since fans have been back in attendance. It's an improvement that I thought would be much more short term and is yet to dissipate really at all. Other than obviously the first week was a big week, but this post SummerSlam has been big ratings for Raw and SmackDown as well, and it looks like the rating that we'll probably find out a final rating for tomorrow afternoon for SmackDown is going to be quite high too. So it's not been a short-term improvement; it has been a sustained improvement. Now that said, WWE Raw will be going against college football tonight, and will be going against NFL Monday Night Football for the rest of the year through January 3rd of next year. In fact, that will probably negatively impact its ratings, but there's been a sustained increase in ratings for WWE since the return to touring. And you can look at the trends of ratings over time and see how much they have declined. And I think you could even look at the trends of ratings in 2019 and 2020, and they under-index the general decline that you'd find in TV ratings. Whether that's I like to look at the non-news top 50 cable average daily, and W Raw performed worse than those trends. W Raw performed worse than the trends of TV overall in 2019 and 2020, the year before the pandemic and the year of the pandemic, the first year of the pandemic anyway. But even though those viewership trends have been negative, what matters more is how Raw and SmackDown rank among other programming generally, and that is harder to follow. You can't put that on a line graph as easily. And WWE's rankings have never slipped, and as long as that stays true, I think WWE stock and WWE as a company is more or less a proxy for the value of live sports. Is AEW's success going to make WWE less valuable as a TV rights property? I don't think so, as long as the ranking remains pretty strong. I know there was a question on the Wrestling Observer Q&A that Dave and Brian did as part of All Out weekend, where someone was asking whether investors, I don't know, understand or why they don't understand sort of what's happening with WWE, and it sort of gets to the point that I'm already making, I guess, in that I think WWE is becoming less popular and is leaving money on the table, but as an investment, as a stock, it's doing just fine. And it may just be a pretty good proxy, maybe as much as any company that's publicly traded that I can think of. Obviously, the NFL is not a publicly traded company. It's I don't know, it's an organization of 30 some odd franchises. Likewise for the NBA. But WWE is a stock that you can, as a retail investor or as a major institutional investor, you can invest in. And I don't know that there's anything quite like it in terms of publicly traded companies. I think there's a little bit more clarity as far as looking into the future. I'm a little bit more optimistic, and I think we can see that things are going to be okay for that kind of sports property. We'll see what happens. Nick Khan talks all the time about monitoring things like the SEC deal that's upcoming, and other sort of middle class sports rights properties that are being negotiated. But I think over the next few years, maybe over the next 5 years or so, at some point, and we're certainly not there yet, and we're a great margin away from it, but the majority of TV watching is still linear. It's still people watching a normal cable, traditional cable or satellite or even over-the-air television program. We are not at the point where the majority of the watch time that people spend watching something on a screen is through the internet or through streaming. Eventually, we will probably come to a point where those two trends intersect and streaming becomes the majority. But I think there's enough time ahead of that for the networks to find a way to monetize live sports in a way that doesn't make things a lot harder for the content providers. And maybe in the next round of deals for maybe that's WWE, and you kind of see this with the NFL, the most valuable live sports property. Maybe the next round of deals for WWE and or AEW, there's some kind of digital rights dealt in addition to the normal live linear rights that are dealt. And with all the speculation about whether the FANGs, the major tech companies, are going to get involved in bidding, if any of them will, Amazon is clearly the most real one that's involved with live sports bidding. Whether they would have any interest in WWE is a question, and it's something that's speculated on, including in WWE earnings calls. And it's sort of a game of musical chairs. Eventually, the music is going to stop, and you might have different networks, different companies, maybe including tech companies that are bidding for these kinds of rights. But that's a problem more for distributors to sort out than it is content providers. Then content providers mainly just have to continue to produce valuable content, and if anything, maybe the addition of bidders will increase the competition and increase the value and demand for live sports. The only issue that I see for sort of wrestling companies is that it behooves wrestling companies to be on a high reach platform. What it really benefits, for example, WWE to be on Fox, which is this massive distribution platform that's in hundreds of millions of homes. It benefits WWE to be on the USA Network, a network that is in 80 some odd million homes, and similar for TNT and TBS, which is and will be the home of AEW programming. Do you get that similar sort of reach and similar sort of accessibility and sort of happening upon a TV channel if you're on, for example, Amazon Prime, or if you're on, for example, some sort of platform that Apple TV might have, or somebody else in media, or even in the tech business? Because WWE and AEW have they're glad to have all this media revenue that makes up the majority of their revenue now. They love having these guaranteed U.S. TV rights fees, but they also have other businesses that it's important that their programming is seen by the largest possible audience, because they have to sell tickets and they have to sell all kinds of varieties of consumer products, and it behooves you to have a large audience to expose your product to, and a large potential audience that could potentially sort of accidentally discover your product. And I just don't know how that happens if you're on something like Amazon Prime, unless they end up having some sort of 24/7 linear channel or something like that. But as far as WWE, WWE is an improving business brand, but it's a brand that's suffering with consumers, and it's a brand that's suffering with talent, and that's why talent are leaving, and that's why fans are disenfranchised. Many of them are, not all of them, but many of them are, and that's why many talent, not all of them, are interested in leaving WWE and going to someplace like AEW, where they get paid similarly, maybe even have an easier touring schedule, and they can be creatively fulfilled. And maybe in the case of somebody like Adam Cole, he can even still have his Twitch channel. And because of that, AEW will continue to grow more competitive over time. And AEW's live sports values are undervalued, more so at this moment anyway, than WWE's are. I remain kind of optimistic that WWE will get a moderate increase in TV rights fees in its next round. AEW, though, if you just compare their viewership and compare the amount of money that they're getting paid, AEW, if I do the math, is due for something like a 3x or 4x. They're due to get their TV rights in the U.S. at least tripled or quadrupled relative to the viewership that they produce. And WWE will, I think, in the foreseeable future, continue to be booked the way it is, in a way that keeps many fans from having much interest in it. But there's clearly, if you look at the ratings trends that we've seen in the last 2 months or so, there's clearly a market of fans who are, who are indifferent to the things that fans who are starting to embrace AEW are bothered by. Not to say that these two audiences are mutually exclusive. Certainly there are not. And I'm sure there are people pounding the table who will tell you that they enjoy both products for what they are. And but there's clearly an alternative effect that's benefiting AEW. And in the case of WWE, there's still some other incremental opportunities for their revenue growth in terms of selling their network rights internationally, especially in the UK, and in terms of the many deals that Nick Khan and his team of many people who used to work for CAA are working on to generate incremental revenue growth for WWE to capitalize on licensing opportunities that just weren't capitalized on in the same way up to this point for WWE. So that's that. I don't see the bottom falling out on WWE. There's a solid base of fans there that as terribly as you could say the WWE is booked, as terribly as the creative may be, and it's chasing away not only fans but talent. There's a solid base of talent and fans who are content to be there, who are content to participate in the system. So I think WWE is going to be okay, and I don't know where the ceiling is for AEW though. That is the larger open-ended question to me. So I think that's all for now. How long did this go? 32 minutes. That's fine. We will. There's a new podcast talking about things, including a little bit of All Out speculation. But that's in the can. You can find that on your podcast app. Search for Wrestlenomics Radio. You can go to Wrestlenomics.com. You can go to the Wrestlenomics Patreon, and for $5 a month, you can get my almost every weekday. I have a TV ratings report, and you can get access to the massive viewership data spreadsheet that I have, and it's got over 15,000 data points in it, and it's the spreadsheet that I use to keep up with all of the trends in wrestling viewership. So I think that's all. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to everybody next time.